And in my opinion, the recent problems in Ukraine stem from the EU, US and Russia playing a zero-sum geopolitical game with Ukraine. Ukraine basically got an offer to throw all its eggs in the EU basket on the off chance that down the line that they might possibly in a few years get EU membership, or to throw all its eggs in the Russia basket and continue to be under its thumb while surrounded by countries who went the the EU route. And meanwhile, the country was slowly becoming more and more bankrupt, socio-economically regressing and rife with corruption. And rather than trying to railroad the Ukraine down one particular political route, the EU and Russia should have been working together to create a mutually beneficial and non-exclusive economic, political and social relationship with the Ukraine. This policy direction would have been of real and genuine benefit to ordinary Ukrainians. And there is an urgent need for restraint from all sides within Ukraine and from foreign powers at this crucial time. We've not seen that approach from the EU, from the United States or from Russia. The interim government in Kiev has very little legitimacy, particularly for those people living in the east. The country continues to be divided, and attempts by the EU, the United States and Russia to increase their influence is merely exacerbating tensions and making their complex problems even worse. I'm under no illusion of Russia's self-interest in this region and its recent behaviour, but the EU's actions have been just as much disastrous for the Ukrainian people. The EU has ploughed ahead with its association agreement with Ukraine, and one of the primary causes of the escalation in the first place. Surely the EU should not been forcing through such an important document with an interim government which is not democratically elected. It is basically locking into a straitjacket any future elected government into the EU's political and economic structures. And again, I don't think that's acceptable. In fact, it's been suggested that one of the first effects of this agreement will see a 50% increase in domestic gas prices on the 1st of May. The EU and the IMF are demanding this in order to provide financial support to the Ukraine. So I suppose that's a sample of what's coming down the track for the people of Ukraine. Before this, domestic gas prices were heavily subsidised by the Ukrainian government, which literally ensured people did not starve or freeze to death during their winter. And we all know the unique conditions of the Ukrainian winter. Yet the IMF, in its wisdom, believes that in order to give an aid package to Kiev, it must cut this subsidy. And again, let's just think of the impact that's going to have on the people of Ukraine. Certainly it's going to lead to deaths, it's going to lead to extreme hardship, and the fact that this is the prospect facing for an indefinite future, with no sort of options of opting out or having a different road. So threats of other enormous spending cuts, while so many people are already in poverty and lack future prospects, are enormously popular throughout the Ukraine, but especially in the east. So far, these neoliberal austerity measures have been spectacularly unsuccessful elsewhere in Europe, including in this country, in Ireland. And they've been increased unemployment, immigration, the sell-off of state assets, and the destruction of social services and social protection schemes. And I think it's going to be the same in the Ukraine. And while some people will think this is fantastic, we have an option and a way out of this crisis, I think if you look at what's happening right across Europe in many countries, including this country, the options are not fairly rosy when you actually look at what's happening to ordinary people in their communities and in their family homes. Sinn Féin have tried our best to get all party support for a motion on the current situation in Ukraine and Crimea. And I think it was, and it is important that there's a joint message sent out in support of the ordinary people in this region. And again, I apologise for the confusion, and some of it's down to my own lack of experience in this whole direction. But we have difficulties in relation to the motion that's put here, and I note that it's down on the order paper that it's signed by Party Leader Jerry Adams. But again, I originally thought that the actual motion was being put forward as a government motion. They were actually looking for an input from parties. I didn't think it was looking for a cross-party motion in relation to this. So we did put forward some amendments to the government's motion, and we're willing to compromise on others, but we have difficulties in relation to this motion as it stands. And I welcome the fact that there was movement from the government in relation to it, and many of the concerns are actually addressed in your motion in relation to it. And I do want to express solidarity with the Ukrainian people, and it's not a case of people changing their minds in midstream in relation to it. We've argued consistently in this House and outside in relation to how we see the best way forward for the people of Ukraine. In particular, the inclusion of the line "welcome the signing of the association agreement" is where we have the difficulty in relation to aspects of this motion. And I recognise there is a compromise motion, but that was the difficulty. That was a major difficulty we had in relation to it, and I apologise for the confusion that was sent out in relation to it. So the agenda of those unelected European Union bureaucrats, wedded to the neoliberal policies and seeking to extend their influence eastward, spreading a destructive austerity, is not something that we actually welcome. We have a difficulty in relation to this agreement, and as I said, the background of why we've had that difficulty. Another major issue of concern, and again I think it's shared by practically everyone in this House, is the make-up of the interim government in Kiev. 3 members of the current interim government are from the far-right neo-Nazi Svoboda party, including the Deputy Prime Minister, the Environment Prime Minister and the Agricultural Minister. And up until his resignation last week, the Defence Minister was also from Svoboda. We feel that the inclusion of these far-right neo-Nazi anti-Semitic politicians, and Seán Crowe is going to come in relation to, can't mention people in relation to it, but if you look at the history of the actual policy of the parties themselves, some of the public utterances they've actually come out of, very concerned. The Rabbi of Kiev has come out in relation to, suggested even that people of a Jewish faith actually leave Kiev because the lack of safety. And again, any of us that are conscious of history and the events that have happened in the past in other countries and in that region, again, huge concerns in relation to what's happening. We feel that the inclusion of these far-right neo-Nazi anti-Semitic politicians as ministers in the government, coupled with the attempts of the government seeking to impose controversial laws, including the removing of Russian as an official language, sent out an extremely worrying signal to linguistic, religious and ethnic minorities in the Ukraine. That the EU sees this government as natural allies and has not been outspoken against the inclusion of neo-Nazis in an unelected interim government, I think is extremely worrying. And I know there's concerns right across Europe in relation, many have expressed it publicly but also privately, in relation to the composition of this new opposition-led coalition, which, and the coalition, I think, is also so far failed to persuade those right-wing militia groups to disarm. And is it any wonder that minorities are living in real security and real fear in that country? The referendum which took place in Crimea on the 16th of March is another factor in this escalating crisis. The referendum was held under the worst possible conditions. The poor security situation, the tense atmosphere, the international pressure, the short run-in, the lack of open and democratic debate, press restrictions, and the lack of dialogue preceding the referendum. The referendum, in my opinion, and again I think that's shared by most individuals, parties, non-party individuals in this House, the referendum was not in line with good practice, good democratic practice. And I'm not opposed to referendums to decide self-determination, but they must be in line with good democratic practice. It is clear that there is a great deal of support in Crimea for separating from Ukraine and joining Russia. However, there should first be dialogue and negotiations within Ukraine, free from outside interference, with a view to finding an overall agreement on the future of Ukraine. In closing, Sinn Féin condemns the political, economic and military interference in Ukraine and Crimea by the US, the EU and Russia. There needs to be an open dialogue between all sides in Ukraine and respect for human rights. There's a need for foreign powers to end hostilities and rising tensions by stating that they will not militarily intervene and will stop meddling in Ukraine's internal future. Ukrainians are the only people who should ultimately decide their own future and self-determination through democratic means. So I repeat that the only people who should actually decide their own future is the people of the Ukraine. The makeup of the interim government is extremely worrying due to the inclusion of extreme right-wing neo-Nazis in key ministerial positions. We reject the signing of the association agreement with this interim government, which is unelected and therefore has no mandate to sign such an agreement. And I think it feeds into the whole thing of the Russians are saying that that creates more difficulties around rather than resolving a problem, and it ties the Ukrainian people into a system that's going to lock them down into austerity. The austerity measures that the EU are imposing as a precondition for providing aid will slash pensions and public services and will increase unemployment and further impoverish many people. All efforts need to be placed into escalating the crisis and allowing the people of Ukraine to discuss and seek agreement on its future. The more Ukraine improves its socio-economic development, the less likely it will be that the country can be used as a geopolitical football it has happened for so long. And I think this needs to be the focus of all our efforts and support in the future. Vermont.